Things have to be thought through, not just fucking randomly thrown out there. So now when you're talking about that weak point, it gets deeper. Is that weak point technical, physical, or mental? That's also going to play into what exercise you're going to use if it's max effort. If the weak point of the main lift is mental, the weight always feels heavy and they don't know what to do and they lose confidence all the time, then I could argue that the max effort exercise can fall way outside the realm of specificity. If you're talking about a squat or a deadlift, if it simply is just heavy as fuck and it helps them build their confidence, because that's going to be what the biggest weak point is. So part of all this is trying to figure out what is the biggest weak point that's holding this lifter back or this lift back, and then how to effectively address it through the training components that you have access to. The one we're talking about now is the max effort method. There's other methods that address weak points as well. This, I'm just going with the max effort method. Now, if it is a muscle group that's just weak, then yes, that max effort exercise being selected based upon a certain muscle group, or muscle groups would be better defined, is going to make more sense. You know, if it's a technical breakdown, and then that max effort exercises that's going to be based more on trying to help reinforce a movement plane is going to be more called for and make more sense. How's the reps play into that? Well, if it's a movement plane breakdown, then generally the reps are going to fall probably a little bit lower because you want to keep it heavier and you want that time under tension for that one rep to be as high as it possibly can be. So that means that the ability to set it up and to stay tight before you go down is going to be a little bit longer. Then there's going to be the rep, then there's going to be the holding it, and then there's going to be the racking it. You want that to be as maximal as it possibly can be if we're talking about, you know, that technical breakdown aspect. Anytime you're going to do 2 or 3 of anything, the technique is going to break the fuck down. That's because it's heavy, right? And it's heavier weight. So if it's a technical aspect that you're trying to fix, you don't want to reinforce bad technique. So you want that maximal work, the max effort work, to fall more into the singles and so forth. So I hope you understand what I'm saying here. It's not just 90% for 3 or fucking 95 for 1 or this for 1. It's this shit that I'm talking about that determines what movements should be being used to be able to correct the things that you need to correct, to be able to get to where you want to go, to be able to be as strong as you want to fucking be. Things have to be thought through, not just fucking randomly thrown out there. Now, with this in mind, you have to also consider training age and physical age and technique. Like if technique's a problem, right? So if technique's a problem and they have a young training age, well, the technique, they need more skill work. So the max effort work probably isn't going to be the fucking answer. It's not going to be a technical answer. It's going to be more probably a muscle group answer, more of a straining mental type of answer, and then the technical work's going to fall someplace else because it's going to be, their technique just sucks overall. It doesn't just suck with heavy weight. So if it's somebody that's more advanced, it's going to suck with heavier weight. Also, the considerations fall in there with training age because they may not be able to do triples anymore. They may not be able to do 5s anymore because the risk-benefit ratio goes too high. It's safer for them just to do singles. So that's a consideration that has to fall in there. Frequency needs to fall in there. So I already talked about the frequency on how it can fall into different training programs as far as higher frequency programs versus conjugate programs. The frequency also does play into how it's going to fall into a conjugate program as well, because there's a training week, there's training weeks, there's training phases, and then there's like meet prep phases, then like an annual phase, right? That's an easy way to say certain phases of training. The better way to define that is to say your training week, which is typically 7 days for most people. But I put this out there because some people will use that training week over 8 days. So that training week is a microcycle. Then after that microcycle, you know, you're looking at basically a mesocycle, which if I'm to lay it out in a conjugate bias type of thing, that's going to be a 3-week block with a 4th week alternate. So the 4th week could be either a deload or it's just going to roll into whatever the next one is. But in my brain, it's typically 3 weeks with a potential 1-week transition. And then if I tie together several mesocycles together, so say in my case, it's a squat that I do this with. If I tie together 3 squat waves together, that is a block. It's not a macrocycle for me, it's a block. And then there may be 3 or 4 of those blocks over that entire macro cycle. So it's one way that I kind of physically structure max effort work that I do to be repeat through and to move through that whole thing. So frequency for me over the period of a mesocycle, or that 3-week phase, is going to be different than the frequency over the block. Because I said there could be potential 1-week transitions that are going to fall within there. So we could be talking about best case scenario 9 weeks. We could be talking about another case scenario to where it's 12, right? So the frequency could fall between 9 and 12 max effort stimuluses over that period of time. So frequency isn't just a per week thing as people think, as most people think. It's depending upon how much you want to structure and think about it, the frequency needs to be thought a little bit longer out. The choice of exercise also matters. You know, that goes back to what I was talking about earlier. Like, what is the sticking point, mini-max issue component that you're trying to actually develop here? The choice of exercise is going to be selected based upon what attribute you're trying to develop. I put in their order of exercise, and that's only because sometimes there are cases where people will do 2 max effort exercises in one day. You know, if it's more of a beginner or an intermediate, or if it's time compressed, they're putting 2 workouts into one, then that order of the exercise is going to matter as well. There's both ways they have to be considered. I can make an argument for both ways. I can make an argument of doing the hardest one first because it's the hardest one. I can also make the argument of do the one that's not as hard first because it's going to serve as a better primer and a better warm-up for the hardest one. What makes the decision on if it's A or B? That's the lifter. Who is this lifter? Do they need that primer to be able to get ready, or do they not need that lifter to get ready? What is their strength endurance? Are they going to be able to even pull this off in the first place? If I don't know if they're even going to be able to pull it off in the first place, you bet your ass the less taxing one's going to be second. So these considerations are called considerations for a reason, because they need to be considered. Volume and workload of that max exercise, that matters as well, especially if you're going to talk about how you're physically structuring them and how they're going to lay out. So one max effort day of one movement the same movement be done this. 2 twins can do the same movement. It can be done completely different. One can use very little warm-ups and get to the top weight really fast. The other one can do a lot of sets, a lot of jumps, and get up there a little bit slower. One's going to have a higher work capacity than what with the other. Not the person. The work capacity of the one scenario is going to be higher than the work capacity of the second scenario. Why choose A or B? It falls back on who is the lifter, what is their current work capacity, is their work capacity something that has to be increased, is the work capacity in a period of time that's looking to increase it, then what has been the consistency of how the warm-up has been going and the work capacity up to this point. If you like this video and want to see more like it, click here.